Welcome back to Chaotic Insights, where I break down the TV show Chaotic, and maybe the TV show isn't the only thing that's chaotic. So, today we'll be talking about episode 15, Shifting Sands. So, grab a snack, start your laundry, and we'll dive right in. But before we start, I must mention that I'm in a new location, and one thing about me is I love a change of scene, so maybe expect this background for a little bit. Who's to say how long, but we're in a new location and that's where we are. That's all there is to say. So, on to episode summary. We start this episode with Peyton and Tom at the trading table. Peyton is offering 3 Mopedian creatures for Tom's sweet spot at Ravenel Ridge. But Tom does not like Mopedians, so he refuses. Then Clay stops by just to be rude, but Peyton uses Clay as an example to get Tom to give Mopedians a second chance. They decide to go to the Kashir Driftlands in order to hike to the Mopedian Oasis so that Peyton can introduce Tom to some of his Mopedian friends. On their trek, they get attacked by a creature called Slurk, and they take refuge in a crack in the desert floor. But what? There's a sandstorm! So Tian, a Mopedian creature, uses a music to shield Tom and Peyton from the sandstorm. Then Tian takes them back and gives them water. Tian makes Tom scan him and promise to use him in a chaotic battle. Then Slurk attacks again. Tian fights to protect Tom and Peyton, but ultimately decides to sacrifice himself for the humans. In his next match, Tom tries out Mopedians by using Kyun and Tian in his overworld deck. Ultimately, Tom wins the match by pulling the same sacrifice that Tian used when he met him. After the match, Tom has Tian on his mind, and we end on an ambiguous shot of like a silhouetted creature walking in the desert. And that's what happens this episode. So, analysis. Tom has some issues in this episode. One thing about Tom is he has issues in this episode. He treats Mopedians like a monolith, and he stereotypes them as violent and untrustworthy. And not only does he hold these prejudice beliefs, but he uses that prejudice as a basis for his actions. Both microaggressions and macroaggressions, one could say. And that one being me, I'm saying it. Tom is not being a nice dude in this. So ultimately, Tian makes Tom question what he thought he knew about Mopedians, thus leading him to the theme of overcoming prejudice. That's kind of our lesson of the episode, is don't be prejudiced. And we do get an explicit, I was wrong about the Mopedians from Tom, further cementing the lesson that we're learning that you should not have prejudice. Additionally, we have an every tribe has a good guys and bad guys theme and lesson to this episode, and you have to learn to appreciate all tribes and all of the creatures. But also, this applies to the real world, right? No group is a monolith. No group is all good or all bad, right? Because groups are made up of individuals, and you can't judge a group based off of one individual. And you can't judge an individual off of their group. You have to learn to appreciate all of the tribes and all of the creatures. So another lesson is there's a good side to every creature in battle, you just have to find it. So this is more specifically about the game Chaotic, right? We have to learn to appreciate all tribes and all creatures, but we also have to appreciate how they're useful to us in the game that we play. So there's a good side to every creature in battle, you just have to find it. Sometimes you have to look past their personality to find how they help your deck. So this is Peyton's advice. Peyton talks about how both nice creatures and not nice creatures have their benefits in the Drome for the game's sake. So you have to look at a creature's utility, right? Are they useful? Is a creature nice or not? that doesn't really matter because you're just using their body as a shell to play your little game in. You know, you have to value their impact. Are they strong? Are they powerful? Their stats? Are they wise? Are they courageous, if you will? Um, and is Peyton like utilitarian in this way? Maybe, perhaps. But he's providing that perspective of you have to look past their personality for their use in the game. And that, I think, is a separate lesson than the you have to appreciate that every tribe has good guys and bad guys, and you can't judge the group off of an individual, and you can't judge an individual off of the group. We're going to move on to Tom. So, Tom, he gets characterized a lot. We kind of come to understand who Tom is as a character, and by now, we get it. We understand who Tom is. But we see a new side to Tom in this episode, and that's him being a wet blanket. He's saying no to every opportunity. He's shutting down things that are fun. He's dragging his feet. He's trying to make other people experience the same begrudgery that he is also feeling. And this episode really heightens a lot of Tom's flaws, right? He's, he's trying to make other people feel bad because he feels bad. And he's really exemplifying a lot of the prejudice that I mentioned earlier, like specifically towards Mopedians. And, you know, generally not positive character traits. And you can kind of account it to he's not in the best headspace during this episode. Like he's really frustrated and he's taking it out on other people. I don't really know. He's just not in the best headspace, but that's really bringing out all of these character flaws. Now, narratively, as a main character, he has to have flaws so that we can see him grow and change, right? If he was perfect this whole time, he would be a static character and we wouldn't be able to see him grow and change, and that wouldn't really be thrilling for us as an audience. But we have to have a before and after. So in the before, he has to have flaws. And so as he grows and changes, we can learn from that and we can also maybe apply it to our own lives, right? We learn the lesson that Tom is learning as he learns it. So with Tom as our audience stand-in character, we're learning the same lessons. He's learning about not being prejudiced, right? And so we're taking those same nuggets of information that's applying to Param, but we can apply it to the real world. And Tom is really shook by the lesson in this episode, like especially the way that Tian makes such a grand gesture through like sacrifice that Tom is really in an emotional place at the end of the episode, and he's really grappling with that loss and that dedication. And I think because Tom doesn't end with like, I did it, I'm done being prejudiced. He's starts being prejudiced and he ends in this kind of in-between stage where he's still figuring out why he felt that way initially, and he's like starting to deal with the cognitive dissonance that Tian being a good Mopedian has with his ideology of what Mopedians were to him. And so, right, I think having Tom not end at the end of that arc, we end the episode in the middle of it, also helps the audience like learn the lessons and resonate with what Tom's dealing with. Because, one chaotic episode is not going to change the world, but if it can make the people watching the episode, question, am I exemplifying similar behavioral patterns as Tom? And that was seen as negative in this TV show. It has a negative connotation. He's not being a good guy in this episode, and he's learning a lesson, growing and changing. How can I apply that to myself as an audience member? I think we get it. So on to Tian. What a great character. I love Tian. I'll say it. Love Tian. But is he a Jesus figure? Now stay with me. um, so there's an archetype, called the Christ archetype, and part of me wonders, like, does Tian fit that mold? Because what Tian does is he sacrifices himself for the betterment of others. And what does Jesus do? Jesus sacrifices himself for the betterment of others. And, Jesus, like, sacrifices himself to save people from their sins. And Tian is sacrificing himself to save Tom from, like, being prejudiced. Additionally, even though we perceive him as dead, like, or at least I did when I watched this the first time, was Tian sacrifices himself. So we're like, oh, he's dead. But then that last moment in the episode where we get the shadowy figure and it's kind of ambiguous, he's in the distance walking through the desert, it implies that, Tian has risen. Tian lives, and that even though he sacrificed himself, he came back. And isn't that what Jesus did in the story of what we were told about him, right? Like, that's the story of Easter. But those are just some parallels that I found, and I think it's interesting to point them out. And like, what are the implications of that? I don't know. I don't know necessarily, but it's interesting that in this kind of episode with a heavy subject material, we get this Christ-like archetype. And we also get to learn a little bit about Tian's belief, like as a character and who he is. He believes that hospitality is a gift to the giver. Now, why does he believe that? He doesn't really elaborate. It could be hosting as an opportunity to spend time together or to learn about others, or maybe it's fulfilling in some way. He doesn't say why it's a gift, so like these are reasons that we can maybe extrapolate from our cultural contexts. But something Tian also does is he clocks Tom for his microaggressions. So Tom is playing with respectability politics in this moment of the scene. Tom has a moment where he only likes Mepedians who, and Tian like cuts him off. Tian is not having any of that. In fact, he is having none of it. And he says the line, "Because we're different, you find us as difficult to understand, just as sometimes we find you difficult to understand." And he's speaking the truth, but then he flips it in a way to put Tom in his shoes, to expand Tom's empathy. Now, is it preachy or is he just saying it how it is? And I think he's just saying it how it is. He teaches Tom to think about the opposite perspective while giving him the grace because he doesn't understand or he didn't understand. And let's go back to that line. Because we're different, you find us as difficult to understand. That's the truth. He's just reading Tom. You don't understand Mepedians because we're different than you. Just as sometimes we find you as difficult to understand. And that's something that I think resonates with Tom because he's had that experience of, Maxwell judged him right off the bat. You're a human. We tried that once. We're not going to do it again. And add the Mepedians even, the run-in with Mudino, like, that's where he made this judgment on the Mepedians was with Mudino. And I don't know, like that moment of just as we find you difficult to understand, it's bridging that gap of like truth and personal experience for Tom in a way that I think, it does give him grace. It goes, you know, you don't understand, but just because you don't understand doesn't mean you have to be difficult, right? So Tian goes on to convince Tom to scan him to walk in a mile in his shoes. Well, he doesn't wear shoes, but Tom is agreeing to, like, Tom agreeing to show his willingness, like, to take a first step towards understanding. And we know that Tom keeps his promises because he did this with Bodil, right? Bodil was like, scan me, use me in a battle. And then he beat Tangoth Toborn. So this is a good strategy for Tian to use of like, scan me, and maybe you'll understand. Or maybe you won't understand, but it'll be a step in that direction, right? Tom is taking that first step of he's not resisting the change. But he's also not admitting that he's wrong. He's just taking a step of, okay, I'll scan you and I'll see what it's like. Now, Tian is also the figure who reveals that Slurk is an overworlder, which right throws a rock at Tom's worldview. Tom holds this bias towards overworlders positively. He holds positive bias towards overworlders. So finding out that an overworld, or right, he's already judged Slurk. He thinks Slurk is just a Mopedian who's being mean like all Mopedians are. So he's already judged Slurk, and he's degraded him in a way that when it's revealed that he's an overworlder, it creates that cognitive dissonance with his existing worldview. He's like, overworlders are good, but I just met someone who's bad that happens to be an overworlder. I thought it was a Mopedian, and so I judged him as bad. Now that he's an overworlder, having that negative association with an overworlder creature, it starts to create that cognitive dissonance. Like the two ideas that all overworlders are good and this overworlder is bad, they don't fit together. So he has to figure that out. And so thus, that also is taking one more step away from Tom's initial prejudice that he's holding towards Mopedians. So those are two like strategies and almost turning points in Tom's journey that nudge him into like grappling with this issue. Now, let's talk about Slurk. So, not to justify Slurk and his perspective, but let's, talk about his motivations. So, Slurk is protective over his water because, you know, everybody needs water to survive, and also they kind of established that specifically in this place, you need water to survive. And so, due to his territorial nature, Slurk perceives oncomers as thieves, looking to rob him of his water supply. He says thieves go in, no one comes out. And he also perceives Tian this way as a thief. And his fatal flaw is greed. He's overprotective over the natural resource when there is enough for everybody. Like there's enough water for everybody who needs water, but Slurk is being greedy and he wants all that water for himself. Gaslight Gatekeep Girl Boss, Slurk is a gatekeep. Slurk also judges the humans in a way that parallels Tom judging the Mopedians. And this gives Tom an entry point to understanding Tian's perspective later. It's, this creature is judging humans because he doesn't understand humans. And so when Tian later says, like, you're judging us because you don't understand us, Tom has that association that, like, he just had that experience. He just had an encounter with a creature who is being mean just because he's human or just because he's trying to drink water. I don't know, whatever way you want to spin it. But it allows Tom to be on the other side of it. And another example of this in this episode is Tom plays another overworld player who is also perpetuating like overworld supremacy rhetoric in some way. And now Tom, having experienced Tian and taking those like small steps towards understanding, it allows Tom to be on the other side of it and to kind of recognize how like not good that behavior was. We see the flip side of it. At the beginning of the episode, Tom was really like, no, I do not like Mopedians because of, my one singular experience with like two singular Mopedians. But now that he's on the other side of it, this overworlder is judging him for using Mopedians. It allows him to expand his empathy to some extent. Now let's talk about the significance of the episode title. So the episode title is Shifting Sands, I believe. Yep. And what does that mean? So we have this quote, just as the sands shift forever, every end is a beginning and every beginning is an end. Now what does that mean? Now when I'm deconstructing it, I first look at, okay, just as the sands shift forever, what are the sands? And I'm thinking it's an allusion to like the sands of time, right? And also like forever is a word describing time. So like the sands of time, it's a concept of time. And so time never stops. It goes on forever. And sand is also like thematic for the desert, so it's a nice word for this episode. Just as the sands shift forever, so just as time never stops. Every end is a beginning and every beginning an end. So he's making an analogy, right? And it's a simile because he uses like or as, and every beginning is an end, just like how the time never stops. So if you flip it, right, every beginning, every end is a beginning and every beginning is an end, just as the sands shift forever. So just as time never stops. And so really what he's emphasizing here is cycles, because like cycles don't stop and their beginning is their end. Their end is their beginning, right? Like the water cycle. It doesn't really have a beginning or an end. You just have to pick a starting point and go. And then eventually it gets back because that's how cycles work. And so perhaps he's referencing the life cycle because, he's just about to sacrifice himself and reincarnate. And so he's giving Tom that reassurance that something positive will come out of his sacrifice. And like Tom thinks Tian is dead, so Tian is asking Tom to not view it as an end, but to reframe it as a beginning, which, could be very beautiful the way that you look at it. But also, I think there is some factuality. Is that a word? Who's to say? But there is some factual nature to his statement of like every end is a beginning because, he's about to reincarnate. you know, he's about to reanimate or however the logistics of that work. Like, don't worry, this end for me is not my end. It's just a beginning. So I think it's interesting to break that down and explore like and why is the episode titled this? Really because I think, the theme of the episode is don't be prejudiced, or the lesson, if you will. But this idea of reframing your mindset is really, I think, the core of the episode because you're reframing the end as a beginning, which is, you know, something positive, if you will. And then you also have to reframe your mindset. So actually, now that I'm talking through it, discovering maybe that is like the core, like through line of the episode is reframing. Huh, that's fun. This advice, every beginning is an end and every end is a beginning, it's also good writing advice if you're writing a script, right? Because every end of a story is a beginning for the new story, because every story starts with a status quo, and then that status quo is broken through the inciting incident, and then every resolution creates a new status quo. So every end of your story has to be a beginning to a new story because you're creating a new status quo. And every beginning is an end because the inciting incident has to disrupt the old status quo. So every end is a beginning and every beginning is an end. And isn't that beautiful? Isn't that beautiful the way that you look at it? So on to lore. So we get a little bit of lore in this episode. Mopedian watering stone, it sucks moisture out of the air to create sources of water in the desert. And we also get that the Mopedian oasis is about a 1 hour walk from this watering stone. But if you left without water, you would dry up halfway there. So really we're learning about the severity of the climate in the Mopedian desert and how that impacts Mopedian culture, right? The scarcity of water. Or not necessarily the scarcity of water, but the importance of like maintaining hydration in this climate and how you have to build your resources and society around that, right? Hence the watering stones. The climate is dry, hot, scarce water, sandy, windy, sandstorms, etc. And that's what they're working with. Another thing we learn is they generalize sometimes Mopedians can use all of their energies to save others. And that's a fun game mechanic, I suppose. And you wonder, how is that useful? Well, so the ambiguous wide shot of the silhouetted figure walking in the desert is implied to be Tian. And so, how does that work, right? Was he reincarnated somehow? Did another creature use music on him? Or did he just need to nap to get more energy? Like in the battle drum, when you die, you you die when you lose all your energy. But is that the same in Param? Like, if you have zero energy in Param, are you dead? And they don't show what happened to Tian's body after the sacrifice, so they don't show whether it's, you know, maybe he lost all his energy and maybe he did just need to take a nap. Maybe that's all it took, right? Was, he used all his energy and so maybe he was laying there and he just needed to take a nap and then he woke up and everything was fine. But we didn't see that because Tom and Peyton poured it away. It's a possibility. So, onto the Amzindrome. We get an Amzindrome name drop, and so on my spreadsheet, based on the wide shot of the drone, we can assign that as the Amzindrome lore. We know what it looks like. Now, onto other notes. They name dropped the Kashir Driftlands, and I could not find a card for that for the life of me. So I don't think it exists. It might, let me know, but I could not find it. Now, early on, when we see Clay, Clay does the, oh, you got a spot, or like flick thing. And I wrote down in my notes, that really shows that he's evil, right? Because no one in the world has ever enjoyed that. That's a real punching down kind of joke. My third other note is this is the first time we see a friendly Mopedian in Param. Right, we have Hearing and Kaor for Underworld, Wama for Danian, we've got Nadrin and Bodil, and Maxor and Farafdo for Overworld. But Tian is the first time we see a friendly Mopedian. And so maybe that is intentional in the story building aspect of the show. Maybe they intentionally didn't give us a nice Mopedian until this episode so that we could have that lesson, because maybe you as an audience member have also built that association of, I haven't seen any nice Mopedians, so why should I like them? And maybe you have to learn that lesson with Tom. That's interesting, the way that the story is crafted. And so that's really all I have for today. On to my final thoughts. I think this is a good episode. I think the theme is particularly important, and I would love to see it dissected even more. But if any of you have thoughts, I would love to hear them. It's interesting that this is a standalone episode, and I don't really connect it to any storyline. Of course, it does rely on Castle Bodrin or Bust happening first, but even though it's a standalone episode, I think it makes you gain a whole lot of respect for Tian just within this 20 minutes. He's so genuinely kind and patient and forgiving and wise, and I think he really earns your respect at the end of this episode. Like, you just have to love him because he is so generous, so much so that he sacrificed himself. And as a kid, when I watched this, I really thought Tian was dead. I fully thought that the writers killed him off. They introduced him and then they killed him off. And perhaps as a kid, that really impacted the way I viewed Tian because he really did just sacrifice himself. But maybe I gained even more respect for him that way because I interpreted the episode in that way. And now, when we see the Tian character puppet in the future, it's mostly in large groups. I would think that it would be a mistake. They just needed bodies to fill in the scene, so they would use the Tian puppet. And of course, I came to understand as I got older that like ambiguous shot of the silhouette in the desert does suggest that Tien lives, and so then them using Tian later in the show, it's not a mistake or like a choice that they made to confuse audience members to disrupt the timeline. It's like, oh no, he actually is alive. And so that makes sense that he is alive and in peril. But as a kid, I think that shot at the end with the shadowy figure, it really went over my head. And, having that understanding of the episode for a certain portion of my life definitely informed the way that it emotionally resonates because, like, Tom thinks Tian is dead, and that adds a layer of grief and nuance and complexity to the story that I don't think it would have if we knew immediately that Tian is okay. And so, overall, we met one cool Mopedian who maybe dies, but doesn't, and we don't learn a lot about Mopedian culture, but we do learn that the overworld has bad guys, and to exercise empathy and respect those who are different from you, and to eliminate prejudice. And so, with that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!